In those days, time did not announce itself loudly. It moved without insistence, almost unnoticed, as if it trusted that we would follow its pace naturally. Many of us remember waking up without the sense of being chased by the hours, without the quiet anxiety that now so often accompanies the start of the day. Morning arrived gradually, carried by familiar sounds and routines that repeated themselves with comforting regularity. There was no urgency to get ahead of the day, because the day itself seemed willing to wait for us. We lived surrounded by rhythms that were not designed, optimized, or measured. They were simply lived. The light entering through the windows marked the beginning of activity, and its slow change throughout the day guided our movements more reliably than any clock. We did not need reminders to pause, because pauses were already part of life. They occurred between tasks, between conversations, between one thought and the next, creating spaces where nothing was required and nothing was missing. Domestic life followed patterns learned not from instruction, but from observation. We watched how things were done and, over time, learned to do them the same way. Meals were prepared without haste, not because there was extra time, but because there was no expectation of speed. The kitchen was not a place of efficiency, but of presence. The simple acts of washing, cutting, stirring, and setting the table formed a quiet choreography that many of us can still recall without effort. Conversations unfolded at a pace that allowed words to settle. Silence was not something to be avoided, nor was it seen as an interruption. It was simply part of how people spoke to one another. We listened not because we had been taught the importance of listening, but because there was time to listen. Replies did not need to be immediate. Thoughtfulness was not a virtue announced aloud, but habit shaped gently by the absence of pressure. Over the years, we absorbed values without being aware of it. Patience, consistency, respect for routine, and consideration for others were not presented as lessons. They were embedded in daily life. We learned them by watching how people waited their turn, how they finished what they started, how they showed up at the same places at the same times, not out of obligation, but out of a quiet sense of responsibility to one another. Social life unfolded close to home. Many of us remember knowing not only the people we lived with, but also those who lived nearby. Familiar faces appeared regularly, not by appointment, but by habit. Encounters happened naturally, often without planning, and yet they carried a sense of reliability. We did not need constant updates to feel connected, because connection was reinforced by repetition and presence. Afternoons had their own character. There was a noticeable softening of the day as activity slowed, as if life itself acknowledged the need to ease its pace. The world outside continued, but with less insistence. For many of us, this was a time for small tasks, quiet moments, or simply sitting without a clear purpose. Being still was not something to be justified. It was accepted as part of the natural order of things. Work, whatever its form, was woven into life rather than standing apart from it. It had boundaries, and those boundaries were respected. When work ended, it ended. The transition from one part of the day to another was marked not by abrupt shifts, but by subtle changes in atmosphere. Clothing was changed, tools were put away, and attention moved gently from one responsibility to the next. Evenings carried a sense of return. There was comfort in coming back to familiar spaces, to predictable rituals that signaled the day was drawing to a close. The lighting softened, voices lowered, and the pace slowed further. We gathered not to fill time, but to share it. The act of being together required no explanation and no entertainment beyond one another's presence. We did not feel the need to document every moment. Experiences were lived fully and then carried quietly within us. Memory was not something externalized, but something internal, shaped by repetition and emotional resonance. Over time, these memories settled into us, forming a shared understanding of what life felt like when it was not constantly moving forward. Looking back now, many of us recognize that simplicity was not the result of lack, but of balance. Life did not demand constant attention, and so attention could be given freely to what was directly in front of us. There was room to notice small details, to appreciate the ordinary without feeling the need to elevate it or explain it. Children grew within this environment of steady rhythms and gentle expectations. They learned by watching, by imitating, and by gradually participating in the same routines that structured adult life. There was no clear division between learning and living. Skills were passed down quietly, without ceremony, through shared time and repeated actions. The pace of those days allowed for mistakes without consequence. Errors were corrected not through urgency, but through repetition. There was confidence in the idea that understanding would come with time. Nothing needed to be rushed to completion. Progress was measured not by speed, but by consistency. As years passed, these patterns became deeply ingrained. They shaped how we perceive time, effort, and connection. Even now, long after those days are gone, many of us carry within us an internal sense of rhythm formed during that period. It influences how we remember, how we wait, and how we respond to the world around us. There was dignity in the ordinary. Daily tasks were not trivialized or dismissed. They were understood as part of maintaining a shared life. The repetition of these tasks did not dull their meaning. Instead, it reinforced a sense of continuity and reliability that extended beyond any single day. Change occurred, but slowly, almost imperceptibly. Adjustments were made over time, allowing people to adapt without feeling unmoored. Life did not require constant reinvention. There was comfort in familiarity, and trust in the idea that what had worked before would likely continue to work. We did not speak often about legacy, yet legacy was being formed quietly through example. The way we lived, the pace we accepted, and the attention we gave to one another created a framework that could be passed on without words. It was not something we planned to leave behind. It simply remained, carried forward through habits and attitudes that endured. As we reflect on those years now, there is no need to idealize them. They were not without difficulty or effort. Yet there was a steadiness to life that allowed challenges to be faced without overwhelming the whole. Problems existed, but they did not consume every moment. There was space around them, room to breathe. Time moved forward then, as it always does, but it did so without urgency. Days followed one another in a way that felt continuous rather than fragmented. Life was experienced as a long, unfolding process rather than a series of isolated moments demanding attention. In remembering this, many of us are not longing to return, but simply acknowledging what once was. There is value in recognizing how living slowly was once normal, not because it was better in every way, but because it shaped a particular way of being that still resonates within us. The memory of that pace remains, steady and quiet, reminding us that time does not always need to be chased in order to be lived. As the day unfolded, its structure revealed itself not through schedules, but through familiarity. Many of us remember how the hours seemed to carry distinct moods, each one gently preparing us for next. Morning had its clarity and purpose, afternoon its softness, and evening its sense of closure. These transitions were not announced, yet they were deeply felt. We did not need to name them, because we lived them repeatedly until they became part of our internal sense of time. Daily routines were not rigid, yet they were dependable. There was reassurance in knowing what came next, even if the exact details varied. Tasks were approached with an understanding that they belonged to the day, not that the day existed to complete them. This subtle distinction shaped how effort was experienced. Work was something we did, not something that defined us entirely. It occupied its place and then quietly stepped aside. The spaces we inhabited reflected the same calm continuity. Homes were arranged for living, not for display. Objects had clear purposes and were used until they wore out, then repaired if possible. We learned to recognize the marks of use as signs of care rather than neglect, which did not diminish value. It confirmed it. Over time, these objects became familiar companions, carrying silent histories of daily life. Meals, in particular, held a central place in the rhythm of the day. They were moments of gathering, not interruptions. Preparation took time, and that time was understood as part of the meal itself. Eating was not rushed, nor was it treated as something to be done alongside other activities. It was an event of quiet importance, a shared pause that anchored the day. The act of sitting together created a natural opportunity for exchange. Stories were told without performance, often repeated, sometimes interrupted, always received with patience. Listening was not a skill to be practiced deliberately. It was simply what one did when another spoke. These moments of shared attention strengthened bonds without requiring effort or explanation. Outside the home, Life unfolded at a similarly measured pace. Streets were familiar, walked often enough to become known by heart. We noticed small changes not because we were alert for them, but because we moved slowly enough for them to register. A new sound, a subtle shift in routine, or an unexpected absence carried meaning precisely because the surrounding pattern was stable. Many of us recall how time spent outdoors felt unstructured yet complete. There was no pressure to fill every moment with activity. Being present was enough. The world offered itself through simple sensations, and we accepted it without expectation. These experiences did not demand attention. They invited it. Learning occurred quietly, woven into daily life. We acquired knowledge through repetition and exposure rather than instruction. Skills developed gradually, often without a clear moment of mastery. There was no rush to prove competence. Improvement came naturally through continued engagement and observation. Respect for others was not taught as a principle, but demonstrated through behavior. We learned how to wait, how to speak, and how to share space by watching how these things were done around us. Correction, when necessary, was gentle and infrequent. Expectations were understood rather than enforced. There was an unspoken agreement that life required participation, not performance. One showed up, did one's part, and trusted that others would do the same. This mutual understanding created a sense of reliability that extended beyond individual relationships. It shaped how communities functioned, fostering cooperation without the need for constant negotiation. As the years passed, these patterns became deeply familiar. We did not question them because they felt natural. Change was slow enough to be absorbed without disruption. When adjustments occurred, they did so within an existing framework that provided stability. Life did not ask us to constantly redefine ourselves. The absence of urgency allowed for reflection without introspection. Thoughts emerged during quiet moments, not because we sought them out, but because space existed for them. We were not encouraged to analyze every feeling. Instead, we learned to let experiences settle on their own, trusting that understanding would follow in time. Even leisure was approached with moderation. Entertainment was not constant, nor was it expected to fill every free moment. Enjoyment came from simple pleasures, often repeated, and valued precisely because they did not overwhelm the senses. There was room to become familiar with what we enjoyed, rather than always seeking something new. As evening deepened, the day gently released its hold. Activity slowed further, and attention turned inward. There was comfort in knowing that the day had followed its course, and that rest was approaching. The boundary between activity and rest was clear, respected by all. Sleep was not something to be optimized or managed. It arrived naturally, following a day that had unfolded at a human pace. The night offered a complete pause, unbroken by interruptions or demands. Rest was understood as necessary, not indulgent. Over time, these experiences shaped our sense of continuity. Days connected to one another, forming a coherent flow rather than a series of separate events. Life felt cumulative, built gradually through repeated actions and shared moments. Looking back, many of us recognize that this way of living fostered a quiet confidence. We trusted time to do its work. We trusted ourselves to adapt. There was no need to hurry toward the future, because the present provided enough. These memories remain not as sharp images, but as impressions. They surface in moments of stillness, reminding us of a pace that once felt natural. We carry them not with longing, but with recognition, aware that they shape how we understand time, effort, and connection. In remembering how slowly life moved, we also recall how fully it was lived. The absence of haste did not diminish experience. It deepened it. Each day had room to unfold, allowing us to inhabit it completely, without feeling pulled away from ourselves or from one another. This way of being was not defined by what we lacked, but by what we allowed. We allowed time to pass without interference. We allowed relationships to develop gradually. We allowed ourselves to remain present, trusting that life, moving at its own pace, would carry us forward. As these reflections settle, they do so gently, without demanding conclusions. They simply remind us that living slowly was once normal, not as an ideal to be reclaimed, but as a reality that shaped a generation's understanding of what it meant to live well. As we move further into memory, the ordinary scenes of daily life begin to reveal their quiet depth. Many of us remember how days were shaped not by novelty, but by repetition, and how repetition itself carried meaning. Doing the same things in the same ways created a sense of grounding. It allowed life to feel stable even when circumstances changed. Familiar actions offered reassurance, reminding us that continuity existed beyond any single moment. Household routines followed patterns refined over time. Cleaning, repairing, organizing, and maintaining were not occasional tasks, but ongoing practices. They were approached without resentment, because they were understood as part of caring for a shared space. We did not speak of balance, yet balance was present. Effort was distributed across days, preventing exhaustion and preserving energy for what truly mattered. There was pride in keeping things in order, not as a display for others, but as an expression of self-respect. A well-kept home reflected attention rather than perfection. Small imperfections were accepted, even expected. They reminded us that life was being lived, not staged. This acceptance extended beyond objects and spaces, shaping how we viewed ourselves and others. Time spent together did not require justification. We gathered without agendas, often without words. Simply being present was enough. These moments created a sense of belonging that did not depend on constant affirmation. We knew where we stood with one another because our interactions were consistent and unforced. Many of us recall how knowledge was transmitted subtly. Advice was rarely given directly. Instead, we observed how problems were approached, how decisions were made, and how consequences were accepted. We learned patience by watching others wait. We learned responsibility by seeing tasks completed, even when they were tedious. Over time, these observations shaped our own behavior more effectively than instruction ever could. Mistakes were treated as part of learning, not as failures. Correction came through gentle guidance or quiet repetition. There was trust in the process, confidence that understanding would emerge naturally. This approach fostered resilience without pressure, allowing growth to occur without fear. Community life played a significant role in reinforcing these values. People knew one another not through profiles or introductions, but through shared routines. Regular encounters built familiarity and trust. There was comfort in recognizing faces, even without knowing details. Presence mattered more than explanation. Public spaces were used thoughtfully. We moved through them with awareness, mindful of others without being instructed to do so. Courtesy was an unspoken agreement, maintained through mutual observation and respect. These small acts of consideration accumulated, creating an environment where cooperation felt natural. As days passed, the distinction between time spent alone and time spent with others remained clear and respected. Solitude was not seen as loneliness, but as a necessary complement to social life. We learned to be comfortable with ourselves, to sit quietly with our thoughts without distraction. This ability developed gradually, supported by the absence of constant noise. Even leisure carried a sense of moderation. Activities were chosen not for intensity, but for enjoyment. Repetition enhanced pleasure rather than diminishing it. Familiar pastimes provided comfort, allowing us to relax without stimulation. We did not need constant novelty to feel engaged. The pace of communication reflected the same calm. Messages were delivered personally, often face-to-face. Responses were not immediate, and this delay was accepted. Waiting did not signify neglect. It was simply part of the rhythm of life. Anticipation added depth to interaction, making exchanges more meaningful. Over the years, these patterns shaped our understanding of time as something to inhabit rather than manage. We did not feel compelled to fill every moment. Empty spaces were valued for what they offered: rest, reflection, and presence. Silence was not feared. It was welcomed as a natural part of experience. As we reflect on this now, many of us recognize how these habits fostered a sense of security. Life felt predictable enough to be trusted, yet flexible enough to accommodate change. We did not need constant reassurance, because reassurance was built into daily life through consistency and care. The absence of urgency allowed relationships to deepen gradually. Trust developed over time, reinforced by repeated interactions and shared experiences. There was no expectation of instant connection. Bonds formed slowly, often unnoticed until they were firmly established. This gradual development extended to personal identity. We did not feel pressure to define ourselves quickly or completely. Identity emerged through lived experience, shaped by roles, responsibilities, and relationships. Change was accepted as part of growth, not as a threat to stability. As seasons passed, they marked time more effectively than any calendar. Changes in light, temperature, and routine signaled transitions naturally. We adjusted without effort, guided by observation rather than instruction. These cycles reinforced a sense of continuity, reminding us that change was constant yet gentle. Work and rest maintained a clear relationship. Each supported the other. Effort was balanced by recovery, preventing the extremes of exhaustion or stagnation. This balance was not calculated. It was lived. We learned when to push forward and when to pause, guided by experience rather than external demands. Looking back, many of us understand that this way of living fostered endurance. Life could be faced steadily, without being overwhelming. Challenges were met one at a time, within a broader framework of stability. There was confidence that difficulties would pass, just as previous ones had. These memories remain with us not as detailed records, but as a general sense of how life felt. They influence how we respond to the present, often without our awareness. When we seek calm, when we value patience, when we appreciate routine, we are drawing from this inherited understanding. There is no need to compare these experiences with what came later. Each era carries its own rhythms and demands. Yet acknowledging how life once moved allows us to recognize the impact of pace on well-being. It reminds us that slowness was not a deficiency, but a condition that allowed life to unfold fully. As this reflection continues, it does so without urgency. It mirrors the very pace it describes, offering space between ideas, allowing each thought to settle. In remembering how living slowly was normal, we are not seeking to return, but to understand. And in understanding, we find a quiet continuity that links past and present without strain. The memory of those days does not ask for judgment or resolution. It simply exists, steady and enduring, much like the life it recalls. As time moved forward within those steady patterns, the sense of continuity became more deeply rooted in everyday life. Many of us remember how the passage of years did not feel abrupt. Change arrived quietly, woven into routines rather than imposed upon them. We noticed it not through disruption, but through subtle shifts that accumulated gently, allowing us to adjust without feeling unsettled. There was a quiet confidence in knowing how things were done. Customs, habits, and shared understandings provided guidance without the need for constant explanation. We did not question every action or choice. Instead, we trusted what had been proven over time. This trust reduced uncertainty and allowed us to focus our attention on living rather than deciding how to live. The relationship between effort and reward was clear and tangible. Tasks took time, and results appeared gradually. We learned to accept this natural sequence without frustration. Patience was not cultivated intentionally. It emerged from repeated experience. When outcomes were delayed, they were not seen as failures, but as part of the process. Domestic life continued to serve as a central anchor. The home was not merely a place of rest, but a space where values were practiced daily. Order was maintained through habit, not compulsion. Responsibility was shared, often without discussion. Each person understood their role through observation and repetition, contributing to a sense of mutual reliance. We learned early that attention mattered. Small gestures carried significance because they were offered without haste. A greeting, a shared moment, a quiet acknowledgement all reinforced connection. These acts did not seek recognition. Their value lay in their consistency and sincerity. Time spent together was rarely structured. Gatherings unfolded naturally, shaped by conversation and shared presence rather than schedules. We lingered without concern for efficiency. The absence of urgency allowed interactions to deepen, fostering familiarity and trust over time. Many of us recall how communication was direct yet measured. Words were chosen carefully, not because they were scrutinized, but because speaking was intentional. Silence was respected as much as speech. There was no expectation to fill every pause. Meaning emerged gradually, carried as much by tone and timing as by word themselves. The pace of life allowed emotions to surface and settle naturally. Feelings were acknowledged through behavior rather than declaration. Comfort was offered through presence, not explanation. We learned to read subtle cues, developing sensitivity to others without explicit instruction. Over time, this environment nurtured resilience. Life's challenges were met steadily, supported by routine and community. There was an understanding that difficulties were temporary, part of a larger continuum. This perspective reduced anxiety and encouraged perseverance. We also learned to value limits. Resources were used thoughtfully, time was respected, and energy was conserved. Excess was unnecessary. Satisfaction came from adequacy rather than abundance. This moderation fostered appreciation for what was available, reinforcing contentment without complacency. As years passed, these habits shaped our perception of progress. Advancement was measured not by speed or visibility, but by stability and continuity. We took pride in maintaining what had been built, recognizing that preservation required effort and care. The absence of constant stimulation allowed attention to settle on the immediate environment. We noticed changes in light, weather, and sound because we were not distracted from them. These observations grounded us in the present, reinforcing a sense of belonging within our surroundings. Learning continued throughout life, guided by experience rather than instruction. Skills evolved gradually, refined through repetition and observation. There was no expectation of mastery, only improvement. This approach encouraged curiosity without pressure, allowing growth to occur naturally. As we reflect now, many of us recognize how these patterns foster a sense of coherence. Life felt connected, each part related to the whole. Decisions were made within a broader context, informed by past experience and shared understanding. This coherence extended across generations. Knowledge and values were passed down quietly, embedded in daily practice. We did not speak often of inheritance, yet it occurred continuously through example and repetition. The memory of this way of living carries a particular texture. It is not defined by specific events, but by an overall sense of steadiness. It reminds us of a time when living slowly was not a choice, but a condition that shaped how life was experienced. In acknowledging this, we are not assigning superiority or loss. We are simply recognizing a rhythm that once guided daily life. This recognition allows us to understand our own responses to time and change, tracing them back to experiences formed long ago. As the reflection continues, it does so gently, mirroring the pace it describes. Each thought follows the previous without urgency, creating a narrative that unfolds rather than advances. In this unfolding, we find space to remember, not with longing, but with quiet clarity. The memory remains steady and unobtrusive, much like the life it recalls. As these reflections deepen, we begin to notice how time itself seemed to cooperate with daily life rather than compete with it. Many of us remember how waiting was not considered an inconvenience. It was simply part of how things unfolded. Waiting for food to cook, for someone to arrive, or for a task to be completed did not provoke restlessness. Those intervals were lived, not endured, and often filled with quiet observation or simple thought. There was a shared understanding that not everything could, or should, happen immediately. This understanding softened expectations and reduced disappointment. When something took longer than anticipated, it did not feel like a disruption, but like an extension of the natural order. We trusted that things would resolve themselves in time, because experience had taught us that they usually did. The pace of craftsmanship reflected the same principle. Whether in small household repairs or everyday tasks, care was taken not to rush. Doing something well mattered more than doing it quickly. Skill was respected, not for its efficiency, but for its reliability. We learned to appreciate the process as much as the outcome, finding satisfaction in careful attention. This approach extended to relationships as well. Trust was built gradually, reinforced by consistency rather than declarations. People revealed themselves over time, through repeated behavior rather than promises. This slow unfolding allowed for deeper understanding and reduced the need for constant reassurance. Many of us recall how disagreement was handled with restraint. Differences of opinion existed, but they were rarely dramatized. Conversation allowed for pause and reflection, making space for perspectives to coexist. Resolution was often achieved quietly, without the need for definitive conclusions. The absence of constant comparison contributed to a sense of contentment. We measured our lives against familiar standards rather than distant ideals. What mattered was adequacy, reliability, and shared experience. There was less pressure to distinguish oneself, and more value placed on fitting into a collective rhythm. Daily life offered repeated opportunities to practice patience. Lines were accepted, delays were expected, and interruptions were absorbed without resentment. These small exercises in waiting strengthened emotional endurance, allowing us to navigate larger challenges with greater composure. As years accumulated, the benefits of this pace became more apparent. Life felt less fragmented. Experiences connected to one another, forming a coherent narrative rather than isolated moments. We did not feel compelled to constantly reorient ourselves, because the underlying structure remained stable. Memory itself was shaped by this continuity. We remember not only events, but the atmosphere in which they occurred. The feelings associated with ordinary days often linger longer than those tied to exceptional moments. The subtle layering of memory created a rich internal landscape that could be revisited quietly. The way we occupied our time reflected a balance between effort and ease. There was a natural alternation between activity and rest, guided by physical cues rather than external demands. Fatigue signaled the need to pause, and pause was respected as necessary. We learned to listen to ourselves without analysis. Needs were recognized intuitively, addressed through adjustment rather than strategy. This attunement reduced stress and fostered self-trust, reinforcing the idea that balance could be maintained through attention rather than control. As we grew older within this framework, our understanding of time matured. We became comfortable with its passage, recognizing change as gradual rather than abrupt. Aging was not a sudden realization, but a series of subtle shifts absorbed over years. This perspective influenced how we approached responsibility. Obligations were accepted as part of belonging to a shared life. They did not feel imposed, but integrated. Carrying responsibility was a way of participating, contributing to the continuity that sustained us all. Even moments of uncertainty were held within this steady context. When outcomes were unclear, we waited. When decisions were difficult, we took time. There was confidence in the idea that clarity would emerge, given patience and experience. Looking back now, many of us see how this environment nurtured emotional steadiness. Life's fluctuations were met with moderation rather than extremes. Joy was appreciated quietly, and sorrow was allowed its space without overwhelming the whole. These qualities were not celebrated or named. They were simply lived. Their value became evident only later, when life's pace began to shift and the contrast grew clearer. The memory of living slowly carries a particular warmth. It is not tied to nostalgia for specific objects or places, but to a way of moving through time. It reminds us of an internal rhythm that once aligned closely with the world around us. As this reflection continues, it does so without urgency or conclusion. It mirrors the experience it describes, allowing thoughts to unfold gradually, one after another, without pressure to arrive anywhere. In this gentle progression, we recognize how living slowly shaped not only our days, but our understanding of life itself. It taught us to value presence over speed, continuity over novelty, and patience over immediacy. These lessons remain with us, quietly informing our responses to the present. They do not demand that we recreate the past, but they offer a reference point, a reminder that time can be lived as well as measured. The memory endures, calm and steady, much like the pace of life it recalls, continuing to resonate softly within us as time moves on. As we continue to reflect, the quiet influence of that slower pace becomes even more apparent in how we understood responsibility and commitment. Many of us remember how promises were made carefully and kept steadily. A word given carried weight, not because it was formalized, but because it was understood as an extension of one's presence in the world. Reliability was demonstrated over time, through consistent action rather than reassurance. There was an acceptance that effort was a normal part of life. Tasks were not framed as burdens to be avoided, but as contributions to a shared order. This understanding shaped how we approached even the most ordinary duties. Completing them did not require motivation or external reward. It was enough to know that they needed to be done and that doing them well mattered. We learned to pace ourselves intuitively. There was no expectation of constant productivity. Periods of activity were naturally followed by periods of rest. This balance was not scheduled. It was felt. The body and mind were allowed to signal when to slow down, and those signals were respected without guilt. Time spent alone carried its own quiet importance. Solitude was not filled automatically with distraction. It offered space for thought, memory, and simple awareness. Many of us became comfortable with our own company, learning to sit without needing to occupy ourselves. This familiarity with stillness fostered inner stability that remained even as circumstances changed. The natural environment played a subtle but steady role in shaping this rhythm. We were attuned to changes in weather and light, adjusting our activities accordingly. These external cues provided structure without instruction, reinforcing the sense that life unfolded in cycles rather than in straight lines. We did not rush toward milestones. Progress was acknowledged gradually, often only in retrospect. Achievements were integrated into life rather than celebrated extensively. Satisfaction came from continuity, from knowing that one was moving forward steadily, even if imperceptibly. This approach influenced how we face uncertainty. When outcomes were unknown, we waited. When solutions were not immediate, we trusted that time would reveal them. This patience did not eliminate difficulty, but it softened its impact, allowing us to remain grounded while navigating challenges. Relationships were sustained through presence rather than maintenance. We did not feel the need to constantly affirm connection. Trust developed through shared experience and repetition. When distance occurred, it was understood within a broader context of continuity. The way we remembered the past was shaped by this steadiness. Memories were not curated or revisited frequently. They settled quietly, becoming part of our internal landscape. We carried them without needing to reference them constantly, confident in their place within us. As life progressed, this foundation provided resilience. Changes were absorbed rather than resisted. We adapted without losing our sense of self, because identity had been formed gradually, anchored in routine and shared understanding. The absence of urgency allowed for reflection without self-consciousness. Thought emerged naturally, often during unoccupied moments. We did not feel compelled to analyze our experiences extensively. Understanding came through accumulation rather than examination. Even ambition was tempered by this pace. Aspirations existed, but they were pursued steadily rather than urgently. There was confidence in the idea that progress required time and that effort would be rewarded eventually. Looking back now, many of us recognize how this environment fostered trust in life itself. We believe that things will unfold as they should, given patience and care. This belief reduced anxiety and encouraged perseverance. The memory of that pace remains with us, not as a blueprint, but as a reference. It reminds us that life can be lived fully without constant acceleration. It offers reassurance that steadiness has its own strength. As this reflection continues, it maintains the same unhurried rhythm. Each thought follows the last without pressure, allowing space for recognition and understanding. In this space, we acknowledge how living slowly shaped our perception of time, effort, and connection. The legacy of those days is not found in specific practices, but in an enduring sensibility. It influences how we respond to the present, guiding us toward patience, moderation, and presence even amid change. Time moves on, as it always has, but the memory of living slowly remains steady within us, a quiet reminder of a rhythm once shared and still remembered. As the years continue to pass within that measured rhythm, we came to understand time less as a force and more as a companion. Many of us remember how days were allowed to stretch or contract naturally, shaped by circumstance rather than expectation. There was no sense of falling behind, because there was no fixed point we were trying to reach. Life unfolded at a pace that felt proportional to human experience. The way we approached change reflected this understanding. Adjustments were made cautiously, often after observation rather than impulse. We watched, waited, and considered before acting. This patience did not prevent progress. It refined it. Decisions carried a sense of deliberation, grounded in experience rather than urgency. We learned to recognize the value of continuity. Familiar routine provided a stable foundation, even as individual details evolved. This stability reduced anxiety, allowing us to focus on what mattered rather than on constant adaptation. There was reassurance in knowing that not everything needed to change at once. Daily interactions reflected this same steadiness. Greetings were exchanged with attention, not haste. Conversations were allowed to unfold without interruption. We did not feel compelled to compress meaning into brief exchanges. Time allowed for nuance, for pauses that carried their own significance. The rhythm of work and rest remained balanced. Effort was respected, but so was recovery. We understood that endurance depended on moderation. Pushing beyond limits was neither admired nor encouraged. Sustainability mattered more than intensity. As we grew older, this perspective shaped how we viewed achievement. Success was not defined by rapid advancement, but by consistency and reliability. Maintaining one's responsibilities over time carried its own quiet dignity. We took pride in persistence rather than display. The absence of constant evaluation allowed for a sense of ease. We were not continually measuring ourselves against others. Comparison played a limited role in daily life. Instead, we gauged our progress against our own experience, guided by familiarity and self-awareness. This environment nurtured attentiveness. We noticed details not because we sought them out, but because there was space to notice. Small changes in routine, subtle shifts in mood, and gradual transformations became visible over time. Attention was not divided. It was sustained. We also learned to accept impermanence without urgency. Transitions were acknowledged as part of life's natural flow. When something ended, it did so quietly, making room for what followed. There was no need to rush through endings or beginnings. Both were allowed their time. The way we related to memory was shaped by this calm progression. We did not feel compelled to preserve every moment. Experiences were allowed to fade naturally, leaving behind what mattered most. Memory became selective, guided by emotional resonance rather than documentation. Over time, this approach fostered emotional balance. Joy was experienced without excess, and sorrow without despair. Feelings moved through us at a pace that allowed understanding to emerge. We trusted that emotions, like seasons, would change. As responsibilities accumulated, they did so gradually. We assumed new roles over time, integrating them into our lives rather than replacing what came before. This layering of experience created depth without fragmentation. The pace of learning remained consistent throughout life. New skills were acquired patiently, without pressure to master them quickly. Curiosity was sustained by interest rather than obligation. We learned because it felt natural to do so. Looking back now, many of us see how this environment encouraged a sense of belonging. We felt part of something continuous, connected to those who came before and those who followed. This connection did not require explanation. It was felt through shared habits and values. The memory of living slowly carries with it a sense of completeness. Days felt whole, not divided into competing demands. Attention was not constantly redirected. We were present in our own lives, inhabiting each moment fully. As this reflection continues, it maintains the same measured pace. Thoughts arise and settle without urgency, mirroring the rhythm they describe. There is no need to conclude or resolve. The act of remembering is sufficient. In recalling how living slowly was once normal, we are reminded that pace shapes perception. Time, when allowed to move gently, creates space for understanding, connection, and continuity. This memory remains with us, steady and unobtrusive, as life continues to unfold. As the steady recollection carries on, we begin to sense how deeply the notion of sufficiency shaped everyday life. Many of us remember that there was an understanding of what was enough, and that understanding guided choices quietly. Possessions, activities, and commitments were measured against need rather than desire. This did not diminish enjoyment. Instead, it clarified it. Satisfaction came from knowing when to stop, when to rest, and when to simply remain as we were. There was comfort in limits. Boundaries were not experienced as restrictions, but as forms of care. They helped maintain balance and prevented life from becoming overwhelming. We did not seek to exceed them constantly. Instead, we learned to work within them, finding stability and calm in their presence. The rhythm of the household reflected this sense of adequacy. Daily tasks were repeated with familiarity, creating a dependable framework. We did not expect variety in every aspect of life. Repetition was welcome because it provided reassurance. Each completed task reinforced the sense that things were in order, that the day was unfolding as it should. We learned early that attention carried responsibility. Being present meant noticing when something needed to be done, and doing it without delay or complaint. This attentiveness extended to people as well. We noticed moods, silences, and subtle changes, responding with care rather than analysis. Support was offered through action, often without words. Over time, this sensitivity became second nature. We did not think of it as empathy or awareness. It was simply how one lived among others. Consideration was embedded in routine, shaping interactions quietly and consistently. Time spent in reflection was unforced. We did not seek insight actively. It emerged naturally during moments of stillness. These pauses were not scheduled or labeled. They occurred between activities, during walks, or while sitting quietly. Thoughts were allowed to drift and settle without pressure to resolve. This unhurried pace influenced how we approached decision-making. Choices were made carefully, often after waiting. We trusted our judgment because it was informed by experience rather than urgency. When mistakes occurred, they were absorbed into the larger flow of life, corrected gradually through adjustment rather than abrupt change. The sense of continuity that developed from this approach fostered emotional steadiness. We were less reactive, more inclined to observe before responding. This restraint did not suppress feeling. It allowed feeling to be understood within context. Emotions were given space to exist without dominating the whole. As years accumulated, this steadiness became a source of quiet strength. Life presented challenges, but they were met with patience rather than alarm. We trusted that difficulty, like everything else, would pass. This trust did not eliminate hardship, but it softened its edges. We also learned to appreciate intervals of inactivity. Rest was not seen as wasted time, but as an essential part of living. Moments without clear purpose were valued for their ability to restore balance. They offered relief from effort and allowed energy to return naturally. The way we related to others reflected this same respect for rhythm. Relationships were not managed or maintained through constant effort. They endured through presence and shared experience. Distance, when it occurred, was understood within a broader context of continuity. Bonds did not require constant reinforcement. As we grew older, the benefits of this approach became clearer. Life felt coherent rather than fragmented. Experiences connected to one another, forming a narrative that made sense without explanation. We did not feel pulled in many directions at once. Attention remained focused, allowing us to inhabit each phase of life fully. Memory itself was shaped by this coherence. We recall not just events, but the feeling of days unfolding without urgency. These impressions remain vivid, even when specific details fade. They remind us of a time when living slowly was not a choice, but a shared condition. The absence of constant stimulation allowed creativity to emerge quietly. Ideas developed over time, refined through reflection rather than pressure. We were not compelled to produce constantly. Instead, we allowed inspiration to surface naturally, often during moments of rest. This environment nurtured patience not as a virtue, but as a habit. Waiting became familiar, even comfortable. We learned that not everything required immediate response. This familiarity reduced anxiety and fostered confidence in the passage of time. As we reflect now, many of us recognize how this way of living shaped our inner lives. It taught us to trust ourselves, to listen to subtle cues, and to value presence over speed. These lessons continue to influence us, even as circumstances change. The memory of that pace does not demand that we recreate it. It simply reminds us that another rhythm once existed, one that allowed life to unfold gently. In remembering it, we gain perspective on our own responses to time and change. As this reflection continues, it remains unhurried. Thoughts emerge and settle without pressure, mirroring the experience they described. There is no need to conclude or summarize. The act of remembering itself carries meaning. Living slowly was once normal, not as an ideal, but as a lived reality. That reality shaped a generation's understanding of sufficiency, attention, and continuity. Its influence endures quietly, carried forward in habits of patience and presence that remain with us as time moves on. As this quiet journey through memory advances, we become increasingly aware of how trust played a central role in everyday life. Many of us remember that trust was not discussed or negotiated. It was assumed and reinforced through consistency. We trusted people to do what they said they would do, not because there were safeguards in place, but because repeated experience had shown that reliability was the norm. This trust reduced tension and allowed life to proceed without constant vigilance. Trust extended beyond individuals to the structure of daily life itself. We trusted routines to hold, seasons to return, and efforts to bear fruit in their own time. There was no need to constantly anticipate disruption. When change occurred, it was integrated gradually, without undermining the broader sense of stability that framed our lives. This environment allowed us to relax into time rather than struggle against it. Many of us remember how days did not feel like units to be consumed or managed. They were lived sequentially, each one contributing quietly to the whole. There was little sense of urgency to extract meaning from every moment. Meaning accumulated naturally through repetition and presence. The way we approached difficulties reflected this calm trust. Problems were addressed directly, but without haste. There was confidence in taking one step at a time, knowing that resolution did not require immediacy. This patience did not stem from indifference, but from an understanding that rushing often complicated matters rather than resolving them. We learned to accept partial progress. Not everything needed to be completed at once. Effort could be distributed across days, weeks, or even years. This long view reduced frustration and encouraged persistence. Progress was measured by continuation rather than completion. The sense of belonging that developed from this approach was subtle but strong. We felt anchored within our communities, connected through shared habits rather than explicit agreements. Participation did not require constant affirmation. It was understood as a natural consequence of living alongside others. Social roles were assumed gradually, often without formal acknowledgement. Responsibility increased over time, integrated into daily life without ceremony. We learned what was expected of us by watching others fulfill similar roles. This continuity fostered confidence and reduced uncertainty. The pace of communication reinforced this steadiness. News traveled slowly, allowing time for context and reflection. Reactions were measured, shaped by consideration rather than impulse. We were less likely to respond immediately, more inclined to think before speaking. This restraint influenced how emotions were expressed. Feelings were acknowledged through behavior rather than declaration. Support was offered through presence, not explanation. We learned to be attentive to subtle cues, developing emotional awareness without formal instruction. As years passed, these habits shaped our internal sense of balance. We became comfortable with intervals of waiting, uncertainty, and quiet. Silence did not feel empty. It felt complete. In these moments, thought and feeling could settle naturally. The absence of constant external input allowed us to cultivate inner resources. We relied on memory, imagination, and reflection rather than continual stimulation. This reliance fostered resilience, enabling us to navigate change without losing our sense of self. Even moments of transition were approached with patience. Beginnings and endings were allowed their own pace. There was no rush to move on or to cling. Change was understood as part of continuity, not as a rupture. Looking back now, many of us recognize how this environment fostered emotional maturity. We learned to tolerate ambiguity, to wait without anxiety, and to trust that clarity would emerge over time. These skills developed gradually, supported by the steady rhythm of daily life. The memory of this way of living carries a sense of reassurance. It reminds us that life does not need to be hurried to be meaningful. That meaning can emerge slowly, through accumulation rather than intensity. As this reflection continues, it maintains the same calm progression. Each idea unfolds gently, without pressure to arrive at a conclusion. The narrative mirrors the experience it describes, allowing space for recognition and understanding. In remembering how living slowly was once normal, we are not seeking to idealize the past. We are simply acknowledging a rhythm that shaped how many of us learn to inhabit time. This acknowledgement offers perspective, reminding us that pace influences perception, connection, and well-being. The memory remains steady, carried quietly within us. It surfaces in moments of stillness, guiding us toward patience and presence even as life continues to change. As these reflections continue to unfold, we begin to recognize how deeply that slower rhythm influenced our relationship with expectation. Many of us remember that expectations were modest and closely tied to lived experience. We did not anticipate constant improvement or rapid change. Instead, we trusted continuity. Life was expected to progress, but gradually, in ways that could be absorbed without strain. There was comfort in knowing that not every day needed to be remarkable. Ordinary days were sufficient. They carried their own quiet value, simply by unfolding as expected. This acceptance reduced pressure and allowed us to engage fully with the present, rather than constantly anticipating what came next. The way we approached effort reflected the same understanding. Work was undertaken with seriousness, but without the sense that it needed to dominate every aspect of life. When a task was completed, it was set aside. Attention shifted naturally, making room for rest, conversation, or reflection. Balance emerged not from planning, but from habit. We learned to respect limits without resentment. Physical fatigue, emotional strain, and the passage of time were acknowledged rather than resisted. Slowing down was not seen as failure, but as adjustment. This flexibility allowed us to sustain effort over long periods without exhaustion. The absence of constant urgency shaped how we experienced success. Achievements were integrated quietly into life, not set apart as defining moments. Satisfaction came from continuity rather than culmination. We took pride in maintaining what we had built, trusting that steady care mattered more than visible progress. Many of us recall how learning extended across a lifetime, unmarked by clear beginnings or endings. Knowledge accumulated gradually, often unnoticed. We learned from observation, repetition, and reflection. There was no expectation of mastery, only improvement and familiarity. This approach fostered humility. We understood that understanding took time, and that certainty was rare. Questions were allowed to remain unanswered without discomfort. We trusted that clarity would emerge eventually, shaped by experience rather than insistence. The pace of life encouraged attentiveness to others. We noticed when someone needed help, not because we were instructed to do so, but because we were present enough to observe. Assistance was offered quietly, often without acknowledgement. These small acts reinforced a sense of mutual reliance. Community life benefited from this attentiveness. Cooperation emerged naturally, supported by shared routines and expectations. We did not rely on formal systems to manage relationships. Trust and familiarity provided structure, allowing collective life to function smoothly. As time passed, these habits shaped our emotional responses. We became less reactive, more inclined to pause before responding. Feelings were given space to settle, reducing the intensity of conflict and misunderstanding. This restraint fostered resilience and understanding. The rhythm of seasons reinforced this perspective. We adjusted our activities to changes in light and weather, accepting these shifts as natural. Time was experienced cyclically rather than linearly, reminding us that change was both constant and predictable. This cyclical understanding influenced how we approach loss and renewal. Endings were acknowledged without haste, allowing space for grief or adjustment. Beginnings emerged gradually, without pressure to replace what had been lost. This patience softened transitions, making them easier to bear. Memory itself was shaped by this gentle pace. We remember not only events, but the feeling of time passing without urgency. These impressions remain vivid, even when details fade. They provide a sense of continuity that connects past and present. As we grew older, the value of this perspective became clearer. Life felt less fragmented, more coherent. Experiences connected naturally, forming a narrative that made sense without explanation. We did not feel compelled to constantly redefine ourselves. The absence of constant stimulation allowed for deeper engagement with what was present. We listened more carefully, observed more closely, and reflected more freely. Attention was not divided, allowing us to inhabit each moment fully. This environment nurtured patience as a lived experience rather than a moral ideal. Waiting became familiar, even comfortable. We learned that not everything needed immediate resolution. This familiarity reduced anxiety and fostered confidence in the passage of time. As we reflect now, many of us recognize how these habits continue to influence us. When we slow down instinctively, when we value routine, when we appreciate continuity, we are drawing from this inherited rhythm. The memory of living slowly does not demand that we recreate exactly. It simply offers perspective. It reminds us that another way of inhabiting time once felt natural, shaping our understanding of effort, connection, and presence. As this reflection carries on, it does so without urgency or conclusion. Thought emerge and settle, mirroring the pace they describe. There is no need to arrive anywhere. The act of remembering is sufficient. Living slowly was once normal, woven into the fabric of daily life. That fabric may have changed, but its texture remains familiar. We carry it with us, quietly informing how we move through the world, even as time continues its gentle passage. As this long reflection draws us further along, we begin to sense how deeply that slower way of living shaped our relationship with meaning itself. Many of us remember that meaning was not something we searched for deliberately. It emerged quietly through repetition, familiarity, and shared experience. Life did not present itself as a series of questions demanding answers. Instead, understanding accumulated gradually, almost unnoticed, through the steady passage of time. There was no expectation that every action needed justification. Much of what we did was done simply because it was part of life. This absence of constant explanation allowed us to move through our days with ease. We trusted that what mattered would reveal itself naturally, without being forced into clarity. The continuity of routine played an essential role in this process. Repeated actions created a framework within which meaning could settle. Ordinary tasks, carried out day after day, gained quiet significance precisely because they endured. Their value was not diminished by repetition. It was reinforced by it. We learned that fulfillment did not require constant stimulation. Satisfaction often arose from familiarity rather than novelty. Knowing what to expect provided comfort, freeing attention to notice subtleties that might otherwise have been overlooked. In this way, slowness deepened perception. The way we experienced time encouraged reflection without introspection. We did not analyze our lives constantly. Instead, we allowed experiences to leave their impression gradually. Insights emerged during moments of stillness, often uninvited, shaped by memory rather than intention. This approach influenced how we understood success and failure. Outcomes were not always immediate or clear. We accepted ambiguity as part of life, trusting that clarity would come with time. This patience reduced the pressure to interpret every experience as either positive or negative. Relationships benefited from this openness. We did not demand constant affirmation or resolution. Bonds were allowed to develop and evolve naturally, shaped by shared presence rather than explicit definition. Disagreements were absorbed into the larger flow of connection, rarely allowed to dominate it. As years accumulated, this environment fostered a quiet confidence. We became comfortable not knowing everything at once. Uncertainty did not feel threatening. It was simply part of the landscape, navigated through experience rather than control. The rhythm of life allowed for gradual maturation. Growth did not feel abrupt. We did not wake up suddenly transformed. Instead, change occurred so slowly that it felt continuous. This gentle progression allowed identity to form without rupture, anchored in familiarity. We learned to respect time as an ally. It was something that worked with us, not against us. Given enough time, understanding deepened, skills improved, and relationships strengthened. This trust reduced the need for haste and encouraged perseverance. Memory itself was shaped by this trust. We did not feel compelled to preserve every moment. Experiences were allowed to fade naturally, leaving behind what mattered most. Memory became selective, guided by emotional resonance rather than effort. As we reflect now, many of us recognize how this way of living fostered acceptance. We accepted ourselves and others as works in progress. Perfection was neither expected nor pursued. There was dignity in effort, regardless of outcome. The pace of life also encouraged gratitude without ceremony. We appreciated what was present without needing to name it constantly. Contentment arose quietly, sustained by sufficiency rather than excess. This understated appreciation reinforced emotional balance. We learned to inhabit the present without fixation. Attention rested on what was immediately at hand, without constant reference to past or future. This presence did not require mindfulness or technique. It emerged naturally from the absence of distraction. As time moved on, these habits formed a durable foundation. Even as circumstances changed, the underlying sensibility remained. We carried within us an internal rhythm shaped by years of living slowly, guiding our responses to new demands. The memory of this rhythm does not insist on comparison. It simply offers perspective. It reminds us that life once moved at a pace that allowed meaning to surface gently, without force or urgency. As this reflection continues, it maintains the same measured tone. Thoughts unfold gradually, without pressure to conclude. The narrative mirrors the experience it describes, allowing space for recognition rather than resolution. In remembering how living slowly was once normal, we are reminded that meaning does not always announce itself. Often, it settles quietly, formed by continuity, patience, and presence. This understanding remains with us, steady and unobtrusive, as time continues to move forward. As this reflection reaches its natural fullness, we become aware of how the memory of that slower way of living does not present itself as conclusion, but as a quiet resting place. Many of us feel that these recollections do not ask to be resolved or summarized. They simply remain, settle within us, much like the pace they describe. Time, in those days, did not insist on closure. It allowed things to remain open, understood without being finalized. What stays with us most clearly is not a sequence of events, but a manner of inhabiting life. We remember how days felt whole rather than segmented, how attention moved gently from one activity to another without friction. There was no constant sense of transition. Life flowed, and we moved within it without feeling displaced. We learned, often without realizing it, that continuity itself could be sustaining. The repetition of ordinary days created a dependable structure that held both effort and rest. This structure did not confine us. It supported us, offering a framework within which change could occur without disorientation. As years passed, the accumulated weight of these experiences shaped our inner lives. We developed a quiet tolerance for uncertainty, an ability to wait without agitation. We learned that not everything required immediate interpretation. Some things would be allowed to exist, unresolved, until understanding emerged naturally. This acceptance influenced how we related to ourselves. We did not feel compelled to constantly improve or redefine who we were. Identity was allowed to form gradually, shaped by lived experience rather than intention. We became ourselves slowly, through participation rather than design. The pace of those days also shaped our sense of proportion. Joy did not need to be amplified to be felt, and difficulty did not need to dominate to be acknowledged. Emotions were integrated into daily life. Experience as part of a larger rhythm rather than isolated events. We remember how companionship felt steady rather than intense. Relationships were sustained by shared presence over time. There was no urgency to extract meaning from every interaction. Meaning accumulated quietly, reinforced by familiarity and trust. Even solitude carried a sense of completeness. Being alone did not imply absence. It offered space for thought, memory, and simple awareness. We learned to be with ourselves without distraction, finding steadiness in stillness. As life unfolded, these habits provided resilience. When circumstances changed, we adjusted without losing our sense of grounding. The internal rhythm shaped by years of living slowly remained, guiding us through transitions with patience and composure. Looking back now, many of us recognize that this way of living taught us something essential about time. Time was not something to be mastered or optimized. It was something to be inhabited. We live within it, trusting its movement rather than resisting it. The memory of that trust remains significant. It informs how we respond to the present. Even when the pace of life accelerates, we may no longer live as we once did, but the understanding formed during those years continues to influence us. We notice it when we slow our breathing without thinking, when we pause before responding, when we value routine, or when we find comfort in familiarity. These responses are not deliberate. They arise from a deeply ingrained sensibility shaped long ago. As we age, this memory gains clarity rather than distance. It does not fade, it settles. It becomes less about longing and more about recognition. We understand now what living slowly offered, not as an ideal, but as a condition that allowed life to be experienced fully. There is dignity in acknowledging this without comparison or regret. Every period carries its own demands. Yet recognizing the rhythm that once guided daily life allows us to see how pace shapes perception, connection, and well-being. The quiet inheritance of those days continues to move through generations, not always visibly, but persistently. It is carried in attitudes toward time, effort, and attention. It appears in moments of patience, in respect for routine, and in the ability to remain present. As this reflection gently comes to rest, it does so without finality. There is no conclusion to draw, no lesson to declare. The memory stands on its own, complete in its simplicity. Living slowly was once normal, not because it was chosen, but because it was how life unfolded. That unfolding shaped a way of being that remains with us still, steady and unobtrusive, offering quiet reassurance as time continues its gentle passage.